Are we living in the last days? How do Christians win the culture war? And how do we keep from losing our faith in the middle of it? Today, we're going to look at two chapters from the Gospel of Mark that are going to help us understand the steps that Jesus said that we should take in order to not lose faith in the middle of tumultuous times. Let's dive in. It shouldn't surprise us in these latter days that we would live in difficult times. The apostle Paul wrote as much to Timothy in Second Timothy chapter 3 when he told him in the last days that men are going to be lovers of self, lovers of pleasure, and lovers of money, that will be boastful and arrogant and will do all kinds of evil because we hate good. Ultimately, what we're going to become are people who love the things of our culture more than we love God. I don't know that there's a more appropriate description for our time, but do you know that Jesus faced every one of those scenarios in the last week of his life? You see them all played out in Mark chapter 11 and 12. Think about how those chapters begin. It's Mark's account of the triumphal entry. Jesus enters Jerusalem to a near riot at his presence. The people are crying, God, save us, as Jesus is riding in on the donkey's colt. He goes to the temple and he overturns the table of those who are buying and selling doves and exchanging money and all the things that are going on. Imagine trying to worship in the middle of that kind of chaos. And Jesus is making sure that it doesn't get started again. But in the middle of it all, he turns to the people and he says, Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a robber's den? Whether you know it or not, Jesus is quoting from two separate prophecies about him. The first comes from Isaiah chapter 56 in verse 7, and it's expressing that Jesus was going to be a light to the Gentiles and that he was going to make the house of God not just a place for the people of David, but for everyone. But imagine being in the court of the Gentiles and trying to worship God, and you have people hawking doves and exchanging money all around you as you're trying to focus your attention on God. It shows you where the hearts of the people really were. That second prophecy that he's speaking of comes from Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 11, where he says, You have made it a robber's den. Now, this is a very poignant passage, and it's one that we really need to think about in terms of living in the last days and living in these present times. It says in verse 1 of Jeremiah 7, the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Stand in the gate of the Lord's house and proclaim there this word, and say, Hear the word of the Lord, all you of Judah who enter by these gates to worship the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, amend your ways, change your ways and your deeds. What's happening here? People who are supposed to be religious people, who are supposed to be seeking God and doing good, that their ways need to change. That's exactly what Paul warned us about in Second Timothy chapter 3. Do not trust in deceptive words saying, This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. For if you truly amend your ways and your deeds, if you truly practice justice between a man and his neighbor, if you do not oppress the alien, the orphan, the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, nor walk after other gods to your own ruin, then I will let you dwell in this place in the land that I gave to your fathers. I want you to see what Jeremiah just said. He says, Here is God's case against you. Think about what we talked about over in Second Timothy 3. Think about what's going on in the courtyard there of the temple. All of these people have come to worship God, all of this selling and buying and exchanging of money. He says, Here is God's case against you. You're oppressing the poor, you're oppressing the stranger, you're oppressing the widow, you're oppressing the orphan, you're following other gods. What did Paul say about the last days? That their gods were going to be pleasure rather than God, that men were going to love pleasure instead of God. Jesus is dealing with this in Mark chapter 11. Verse 8 of Jeremiah 7 says, Behold, you are trusting in deceptive words to no avail. Will you steal and murder and commit adultery and swear falsely and offer sacrifices to Baal and walk after other gods that you have not known? Then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, We are delivered that you may do all of these abominations. Has the house which is called by my name become a den of robbers in your sight? Behold, I, even I, have seen it, declares the Lord. This is what Jesus is saying is going on in Mark chapter 11, that you are doing all of these things. Money is their God. You're seeking pleasure rather than good. You have not come to be my people. Now, as they're leaving the temple, Jesus and the apostles pass a fig tree that he had cursed the day before. That tree is a metaphor for everything that's going on in Jewish society in the time of Christ. That's why Jesus referred to Jeremiah chapter 7. But Peter reminds him, hey, this is the fig tree that you cursed in verse 22. That Jesus gives us the first thing that we need to know about standing in a difficult time in a difficult culture. He says, have faith in God. Truly, I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says is going to happen, it will be granted to him. Therefore, I say to you, all things for which you pray and ask, believe that you have received them, and they will be granted to you. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father who is in heaven will also forgive you your transgressions. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father who is in heaven forgive your transgressions. So Jesus is reaching back into the Sermon on the Mount. He's talking about prayer again. But I want you to see what he just did. He says, here's how you handle these false believers, maybe the false Christians that we have in our time, those who would take this passage and try to teach a prosperity gospel out of it. He says, here's how you deal with it. You keep your faith where it needs to be. He says, faith can do some amazing things. Faith can move mountains. Not only do you have to have faith in God, you need to regularly service that faith in prayer, that you need to be talking to God about your situation. You need to be talking to God about the things that you're finding difficult. And you need to trust, keep bringing that to God, that God is going to hear, He's going to know, and He's going to give you what you need. Now, I know the prosperity gospels, those people that are the lovers of pleasure that Paul talked about over in Second Timothy chapter 3. We're talking the Joel Osteens, the T.D. Jakes, the Kenneth Copelands, the Creflo Dollars, the people that are selling you gospel and they are getting rich off of it. That is not what Jesus is talking about. What Jesus is talking about is the way that you navigate the times of Jeremiah 7, the times that he and his disciples live in, the times that you and I live in, is with an ever increasing, ever rebounding, ever growing faith. Because we are not called to win a culture war. We are called to stand firm for the truth and call men out of culture. That's where our presence is. That's where our battle is. My battle is not to go and change the world around me. My battle is not to make sure the Republican Party wins. My battle is to call people to Jesus and call people to God. And the way that I do that is by showing unwavering trust. When I have an issue, I take it to Him in prayer. I give it to Him, and I trust that however it resolves itself, that is exactly what God knows that I need. This whole idea of a culture war, it's nothing new. I started preaching back in 1999. And in that time, I have preached for small country churches. I have preached for poor churches in the worst parts of Houston, Texas. I have preached for churches of moderate size in the Pacific Northwest. And I have yet to find a group of people who were not worried about living in and raising their children, practicing their faith in the middle of ungodly times overseen by ungodly men. Jesus is really bringing this home that what he is telling them, he just called the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees changing money in the temple, ungodly men leading people in ungodly ways who had no desire to follow God. What you need to realize when you're dealing with those kinds of withered fig trees is that you've got to keep your faith where it belongs. And the next thing that we see happening to Jesus in the text is they're questioning his authority. By whose authority do you do these things? They didn't care whose authority he did them under. They didn't care that what he was doing was from God. They would have been able to discern that based on the miracles that he had done. But they had already made up their mind that they were going to put him to death. The next thing that we see is exactly what we see in Matthew, and it's the parable of the wicked vine dressers. That's how he opens chapter 12. A man planted a vineyard, and you'll remember the psalm in Isaiah chapter 5 about God's beloved vineyard, everything that he did for it. He chose the best soil, he built a wall around it, he put a tower and a wine press in the middle of it, and chose the best vines, and all he got from it were sour grapes. You have essentially the same parable, only this time the grapes are good. It's the vine tenders that are wicked. And you remember what happened. He rejected those who were sent to them and ultimately killed the son of the owner. And what Jesus is doing is he's predicting his death. And we see in verse 10, have you not read the scripture? The stone which the builders rejected, Psalm 118 and 22, this became the chief cornerstone. This came about from the Lord, and it is marvelous in our eyes. What Jesus is telling them is, you're going to put me to death, but God is going to do something with my death that is going to destroy you and create something better. And we have to realize in the middle of these uncertain times, however long they go on, in the middle of economic difficulty and political unrest and social difficulty and social unrest, in the middle of it all, God is still doing something glorious, that we have a better purpose. We're not called to change culture. We're called again to bring men to God. Then you have a long testing of the scribes and the Pharisees that begins in verse 13 of chapter 12. And really, this one, it's just like what we saw in Matthew, that Jesus has asked political questions. He's asked philosophical questions. Sadducees want to know whose wife a woman will be if she's been married to seven brothers and had no children in the resurrection. And Jesus says, in the resurrection, there is no marriage. And that sort of throws out the whole idea of Mormonism and eternal marriage. But you'll be like the angels but your real problem is you're living for this life and not the resurrection at all because you don't believe in it. Again, that describes our time and our culture. Even religious people don't really think about the return of Jesus and the resurrection. These chapters conclude with a story that we get in Mark's gospel that I think is worth reading as a whole. That after all of this testing and all of this turmoil, Jesus is watching people come into the temple and watching how they put their money in the treasury. And it says many rich people were coming in and putting in large sums. It says in verse 42, a poor widow came and put in two small copper coins, which amount to a cent. And calling his disciples to him, he said to them, truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all the contributors of the treasury, for they all put in out of their surplus, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she owned and all that she had to live on. Could you do that? Could you do that? That's what it really means to have faith in God, to really trust him the way that Jesus said moves mountains and moves God in prayer. God didn't want everything that she had. God didn't need everything she had. But what she gave wasn't just the coins in her purse, it was her devotion to him. We've become so comfortable having excess and having abundance that it affects our faith in God when times are not easy. And as we saw in Second Timothy 3, that's just one of the signs of the last days. Paul said those times were coming while Timothy was alive. We're still in the middle of them. But men love pleasure, men love self, men love money, men do not love God. Here's how you differentiate yourself. Here's how you hold your faith in the middle of a culture war. Love God, fear God, give him all of what's inside of you. Let him do for you what he knows that you need done. Look, I'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button. We got a lot more to cover, and I realized this one was a lot more fast paced than most of our daily Bible insights. This isn't everything that we need to think about. What does it really mean to come to Jesus? And what does he expect of us? If we can't answer those questions, then we're not ready to have the really important conversations. And you need to watch this video right over here to talk about that next. Until I see you on Monday, have a good day and God bless.